Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I will show you how to cut a Basque waist bustier top. It's going to be a shoulder dart bustier top with Basque waist. Please watch to the end of the video. If this is your first time checking out my videos, you're welcome. Please click on the subscribe button to subscribe and also give this video a thumbs up. So on the screen are displayed the measurements I will use in today's video. I've gone ahead to mark out all my vertical measurements, all the lines, the chest line, the bust point line, all of them to the length of the top. And I've also imputed half of my shoulder measurement on the shoulder line and on the chest line, and I connected the points together. So on the shoulder line, I will take the shoulder slope using the 3" 8" standard. On the 8" point, I came down by half an inch and connected to the 3" point. Then I will impute half of my bust span measurement plus half inch on the bust point line, the under bust line, the waist line, and also the length of the top. That is, half of my bust span measurement is 4" plus half inch, since I'm cutting directly on the fabric, which will make it 4.5, and I'll connect the points I've made together. So after connecting these points, I'll now go ahead and take my darts on the waistline and on the under bust line on this straight line I just ruled. So the dart you take depends on the size of the bust you're working with and what you want. So for this tutorial, I will take 1" dart on the waist on both sides. I will take 1" and then on the under bust line, I will take 1/4" more. That is 1.25 inches on both sides. So I'll connect the dart on the waist to the dart on the under bust. Then from the bust point line, I'll come down by 1" and then connect the dart legs on the under bust to this 1" I came down by. So I will connect using an armhole curve. Then from the length of the top, I will come up by 2" and then connect the darts on the waistline down to these 2" I came up by. Please take note that the length of the top I'm working with is 22", but I added 1.5" for hemming the top. So I have a total length of 23.5". For the neckline, I will use a neck width of 4" and a neck depth of 5". So I'm making a square neckline. Please, the neckline is optional. You can use whatever neckline you wish. So I would use a neck depth of 5" and neck width of 4", and I'll connect. So this is for my neckline. And like I said before, this is going to be a shoulder dart bustier. So I will be taking that from the shoulder and not from the armhole like our normal armhole princess dart bustier. So I would measure what I have remaining on my shoulder, which is 3". I will find the midpoint of that, which is 1.5 inches. I would add extra half inch to that, and starting from the neckline, I would measure out 2". Measure out the 2" and then connect to the bust point line as you see me do. I'm connecting with a straight line from the shoulder to the bust point line. Now I will take my dart from the shoulder. So towards the neckline part, I will take half an inch dart, and towards the armhole side, I will take 1", making it a total of 1.5" dart. So I'll also connect to the line I just ruled down to the bust point line as you see me do. So please, if you do not understand this, in my previously posted video, I explained very well how to make a shoulder dart bustier. So I'll drop the link in the description box so that you watch it for more clarification. So now, to avoid shortage, I would replace the 1.5" I'll cut out. I'll replace it on the shoulder slope. After where half of my shoulder measurement stopped, I will impute 1.5" and then I'll impute extra 1" for joining the center front and the side front together. So I'll add extra 1" to that measurement. Then on the chest line, I would impute quarter of my bust measurement, which is 8.5. So I impute 8.5 on my inches on my chest line. So I would also check what will be cut out when the dart is being cut out from the shoulder. So whatever would be cut out, I would also replace that on the chest line. So after that, I will check the measurement I have from the shoulder slope down to the chest line, and then I'll find the midpoint of that, like we usually do when we want to draft out our armhole curve for the front. So I'll note the middle, and from that middle I will come in by half an inch, but I will not connect my armhole first. I would replace the darts that will be cut out at this point where I got half of my measurement. So I will also replace that and then add extra 1 inch for joining allowance. So now I can now draw out my front armhole. I can now draw out my front armhole. All these new measurements I made will be where my armhole will be. So this is now where my armhole will be, from the line on the shoulder slope down to the line on the chest line. Okay, so if you do not understand this, please check out the video I have on how to draft a shoulder dart bustier. So I'll also add 1.5 inches side seam allowance. Then on my waistline, I'll impute quarter of my waist measurement plus the 2 inches that I'll cut out from the waist. Then I'll add extra 1 inch for joining the darts together and 1.5 inches side seam allowance. Then on the hip line, I'll impute quarter of my hip measurement plus 2.5 inches seam allowance, 1 inch for joining the darts and 1.5 inches side seam allowance. So I'll connect all my side measurements together from the chest line to the waistline and from the waistline down to the length of the top. I'll connect these points together. So after connecting these points together, I'll go ahead and cut out the parts that are not needed. I'll cut out the side and the lower part after the hem line. I'll cut out so that we can see what we have properly, to understand and see properly how we will cut the basque waist. Also remember to add a shoulder joining allowance of 1/2 inch to the shoulder and then cut out. Now, for the basque part of the waist, you can decide how high or how low you want the side part of the top to be. So you can decide to start from the waistline or some inches below the waistline, like 1 inch or 2 inches or 3 inches below the waistline. So for this tutorial, the side, I want it to start from 3 inches below my waistline. So I'll add extra 3 inches to my waistline. That is making it 18 inches. My waistline is 15 inches. So from this 18 inches, I'll then connect straight to the length of the top. Now, depending on how sharp or curvy you want the basque side to be, you decide how many inches you want to come in by from the center front. So for this tutorial, I'll come in by 3 inches from the center fold. You can decide to come in by 1 inch or 1.5 inches, but for this tutorial, I came in by 3 inches, and then I'll connect the part where I came down from the waistline by 3 inches to the 3 inches I came in by from the center front. So I'm connecting. I would first measure out my side seam allowance of 1.5 inches, because I want to connect from where the top starts, not from the allowance. So I would draw out my side seam allowance, and then from that 3 inches I came down from my hip, from my waistline, I would connect using a curve ruler to the 3 inches I came in by, starting from the center fold of the front. So you can see how I positioned my ruler. I want it to be curved, and I don't want the basque side to be sharp. That's why I came in by as much as 3 inches. You can decide to come in by 2 inches or 1 inch. So this is what I have. So I've curved for the basque part. So this is it. Now I'll also add all around the edges. I'll add the 1.5 inches hemming allowance I want. I want the hemming allowance to be 1.5 inches. So you can see how I'm adding my allowance of 1.5 inches all round the hem parts of the top. So I would use my ruler to connect. I'll use the curved part of my ruler to connect the curved part of the basque, just as you see me do. I'll connect it to the hemming allowance I have on the other side where I did not cut out, and that is it for the allowance. So now that I've added my allowance, I would go ahead and cut out. I'll cut out the part that is not needed. So after cutting this out, I'll also cut out the darts we have taken. I'll cut out the darts, so thereby separating the top to the center front side and the side front. So please, before cutting, make sure you check that you have your measurements complete. So I'll go ahead and cut out my top. I'll also cut out the neckline. I'll also cut out the neckline, and that is it for the front part of this top. So I'll fold my fabric for the back part, and then we'll go into cutting the back parts. For the back part, I've folded my fabric into two, and I've measured out my zipper allowance of 1.5 inches, and all my measurements will start from the zipper allowance side. So I've also ruled out the major vertical lines I need for this part. So I'm taking a shoulder slope of ½ inch using the 3 inches 8 inches standard. For the front, I took a shoulder slope of 1 inch, but for the back I took a shoulder slope of ½ inch. So I've measured half of my shoulder measurements on both the shoulder line and on the chest line, and I connected the points. I found the midpoint of the new line I ruled, and also ruled out my armhole curve for the back. For the back, I will not come in by ½ an inch. So every other thing here is just our basic bodice measure pattern, because I won't be adding a shoulder dart to the back. I will not add a shoulder dart to the back. So I will take just a waist dart. So I would measure half of my bust span measurement, which is 4 inches, and I will not add any allowance to that. So I'll take ½ inches dart on both sides of the waist, and I'll come down from the chest line by 1 inch. Then from the from the length of the top, I came up by 2 inches, and that's how much dart I will take. My dart to stop 2 inches below before the length of the top and 1 inch below the chest line. So I'll impute my body circumference, I'll impute my waist measurement, my hip measurement, quarter of those measurements, and also on the waist I would remember to add the 1 inch I will take out for that. Then I'll also add 1.5 inches side seam allowance like I did for the front part. So that's basically it for the back part. Nothing special. This is just a basic bodice part for the back with the allowances added. So now for the neckline, I will also take the same neck width as the front, 4 inches neck width and a depth of 1.5 inches. So for the back, I want a depth of 1.5 inches, and the neck width will be the same with the front. So I've connected my neckline. Then for the basque part, it will be the same thing with that of the front. I will come down from the from the waist measurement by 3 inches, and from the center back, from the zipper allowance side line, I will come in by 3 inches, and I'll connect same thing as I did in the front part, and I'll also take the hemming allowance of 1.5 inches all round. The same thing I did for the front, that's what I'm doing for the back. So I've connected, and this is it. Okay, so I would also remember to come in from the waist part on the zipper allowance side. Remember to come in by ½ an inch to eliminate zip bulge, and I also remembered to add the joining allowance on the shoulder, which I did for the front part. So that is basically it for the back part. So I'll go ahead and cut out the back part. I would check my measurements like I always do to make sure that everything is complete, and then I'll cut out the back part. So for the dart on the back, I will not cut that out, I will just sew it in. So please, if you're yet to subscribe to my channel, please subscribe, and also don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. You can also check out other videos on this channel. I have videos on how to cut a princess that bustier top. I also have a video on how to properly pad your bustier tops. Please check those out. So now these are the parts. We have our front parts and our back parts, and I've gone ahead to iron my wadding on the fabric, and I've also cut out my lining. My lining is 2.5 inches shorter than my main fabric. So I would lay the front parts on the table for us to see how we'll join them. So these are the front pieces. So what I will do now will be to pin them together by the sides. So I will sew using 1/2 inch seam allowance because that's what I left for it. So I will start sewing from the lower parts, and I'll make sure that the bust point lines are meeting on both sides as I'm sewing. So I would pin them and sew them together. I'll also do the same thing for the lining piece. What I do for the main fabric, I'll also do for the lining piece. Then for the back part, I will just sew in my darts. I will sew the darts in on the main fabric, and I'll sew the darts in for the lining fabric. So I've done all these, and this is what the front looks like. Okay, so I've sewn together using 1/2 inches seam allowance, and I also notched the seams open and I ironed properly. I did the same thing for the lining piece. I also sewed in the darts on the back part for both the main fabric and also for the lining piece. Okay, so the next thing to do now will be to join the front part and the back part by the shoulders. You can see the shoulder of the front is now back to the 3 inches it's supposed to be after sewing in and joining the front, the center front and the side front together. So now what I'll do will be to hold them together on the shoulder using the 1/2 inch allowance I left for it. I will do this for the main fabric and also for the lining fabric. So with the right sides facing each other, I've pinned the neckline together. So I'll use the lining to turn the neckline. I would sew all round. I would notch properly and then top stitch towards the lining parts. So I've done all that and I've ironed properly the neckline. So next thing now will be also to turn the right sides facing each other, that is the fabric and the lining, and I will then use it to tidy up the hem part. I will sew using 1/2 inch seam allowance. You can see how I'm pinning right sides facing each other, lining to the corresponding main fabric. I'll do that for the two pieces of the back part and also to the front part. So I'll sew using 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then I'll also sew the sides using 1/2 or less than 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'll pull the lining to meet the top part of the main fabric and also sew. Okay. So like I said, I will do the same thing for the front piece. I would also pin together and also sew all around the hem part, and then I would pull up and also starting from the upper part and sew the sides together. So after doing that, I would turn out to the right side from the armhole side that is still open. I will turn out and then I'll iron properly. So after ironing, I will then join them by the sides using the allowance I have left. Also attach my zipper to the back part, and I'll also attach a sleeve of my choice. So that is it, guys, on how to make a shoulder dart bustier with a basque waist. Thank you for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you're yet to subscribe to my channel, and in my next video I will show you how I made the sleeve which I attached to this top. Thank you guys for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up. Check out my other videos on this channel and see you in my next video where I show you how I made the sleeves of this top. Bye.